The night my sister threw me out into the freezing rain, I thought I had lost everything. But just a few hours later, a stranger in a black car would ask me one question that would change my life forever. What is your mother's name? Why would a powerful man care about someone like me, standing alone, soaked, and forgotten? My name is Mallory. I'm 22 years old, and until that night, I believed I had a simple life. I worked part-time at a small bookstore downtown, spent most evenings at home, and thought that no matter how difficult things got, I would always have one place to return to my mother's house. This is the story of how I lost that home, and how everything I thought I knew about my life was turned upside down. The day it all began didn't feel real. The sky above the cemetery was a dull, lifeless gray, as if the world itself was mourning. People stood under black umbrellas, whispering polite condolences that sounded rehearsed and hollow. I remember staring at the casket as it was lowered into the ground, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold instead of my own. Deanna, my mother, the woman who raised me, who stayed up late to help me study, who held my hand through every fever and every fear, was gone. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me still believed she would sit up and smile, telling everyone it was all just a misunderstanding. That's how she was: warm, gentle, always reassuring. But reality doesn't bend for hope. The final handful of dirt hit the coffin with a dull, heavy sound, and just like that, everything changed. After the funeral, our family lawyer, Gareth, approached us with an unusual urgency. "We need to return to the house immediately," he said, adjusting his glasses with a stiff, almost impatient motion. "There's a matter regarding the will that cannot wait." I remember feeling confused. We had barely said goodbye. The grief hadn't even settled in yet. But something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. So we followed. The drive back to the house felt longer than usual, even though it was the same road I had traveled thousands of times. Every familiar street, every corner, every tree outside the window felt distant, like I was already losing them. When we arrived, the house looked exactly the same. The old Victorian structure stood quietly under the fading light, its windows reflecting the gray sky. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt cold. We gathered in the living room. That room used to be full of warmth. My mother would sit on the floral sofa every Sunday evening, knitting while the TV played softly in the background. I used to sit beside her, resting my head on her shoulder, feeling like nothing in the world could ever hurt me. Now, the room felt unfamiliar, empty. Gareth stood at the front, holding a neatly folded document. He avoided looking at me, which I found strange. My sister, Kelsey, sat across from me, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Gareth cleared his throat. "The last will and testament of Deanna Sterling," he began, his voice flat and emotionless. I listened carefully, waiting for my name. He listed the house, the savings, her belongings. Then he said it. "All assets are to be transferred to the sole beneficiary, Kelsey Sterling." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The words didn't make sense. I sat there, frozen, waiting for him to continue, waiting for the part where he would mention me, waiting for the correction. But it never came. My hands began to tremble as I slowly stood up. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice barely steady. "My mother told me. She told me everything would be split equally. We talked about it. She wouldn't leave me with nothing." Gareth finally looked at me, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. "Do you have any legal documentation proving you are her adopted daughter?" he asked calmly. The question hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because he already knew the answer. My mother had always planned to formalize the adoption, but something had always gotten in the way: paperwork, timing, complications from her past. We had talked about it so many times, but it never happened. And now, it was too late. "I lived with her for 20 years, I said, my voice breaking. "She raised me. Doesn't that count for anything?" Gareth simply shook his head. "In the eyes of the law," he said, tapping the document lightly, "only written proof matters." The room went silent. And then Kelsey stood up. She walked toward me slowly, a faint smile forming on her lips, a smile I had never seen before. Cold, sharp, almost satisfied. You heard him, she said. You're not family. Her words felt unreal. Kelsey, what are you talking about? I whispered. We grew up together. You lived here, she cut in, her tone suddenly harsh. That's all. You lived off our mother's kindness. Don't confuse that with belonging. I stared at her, unable to recognize the person standing in front of me. This was the same sister I had shared a room with, the same person I had taken care of when she was sick, the same person who used to laugh with me over late-night snacks. When did she become this? I'm not leaving, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This is my home too. Kelsey didn't argue. She just turned her head slightly, and that's when the front door opened. A man in uniform stepped inside. Tall, broad, unfamiliar. This is Officer Miller, Kelsey said casually. He's here to handle a trespassing situation. My heart dropped. No, this couldn't be happening. Officer Miller walked straight toward me. You have 5 minutes to vacate the property, he said, his tone cold and official. You are not listed as a legal resident. I live here, I protested. My things are upstairs. He didn't listen. His hand grabbed my arm, tight enough to hurt. 5 minutes, he repeated. Everything happened so fast. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I looked at Gareth, just hoping he would say something. But he didn't. He just closed his briefcase and looked away. I was dragged to the door. My suitcase had already been thrown outside. The sky had darkened. The wind had picked up. Kelsey, please, I said, my voice cracking as I turned back toward her. Just one night. I have nowhere to go. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation, but then she laughed. A dry, empty sound. This house is for real family, she said, not strays. And before I could say anything else, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed in the empty street. I stood there, staring at the wood, unable to move, unable to breathe. It felt like something inside me had been severed. Slowly, I turned around. The wind cut through my coat. The cold seeped into my bones. I picked up my suitcase, but the rusted lock gave way, spilling my clothes into the muddy pavement. I dropped to my knees, gathering them with shaking hands, tears mixing with the rain. That was the moment I realized the truth. I had lost my mother, my home, my family, everything. And as I stood up in the pouring rain, completely alone in the world, I had no idea that just a few hours later, someone would step into my life and ask me a question that would change everything. The rain didn't stop. It fell harder, colder, as if the sky itself had decided I deserved to be washed away along with everything I had just lost. My fingers were numb as I forced the broken latch of my suitcase closed, pressing down on it with trembling hands until it barely held together again. Mud clung to the edges of my clothes, soaking into the fabric like a stain that refused to disappear. I stood there for a moment, staring at the house behind me. No lights turned on. No one opened the door. No one came back for me. And that was when it truly sank in. I wasn't going back inside. Not tonight. Not ever. The wind picked up, biting through my thin coat as I dragged the damaged suitcase down the quiet street. The wheels scraped unevenly against the pavement, making a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the empty night. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if something invisible was pulling me down, trying to keep me there in that moment of loss. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. By the time I reached the main road, the city had already begun to transform into something unfamiliar. The warm, busy streets I knew during the day had turned into a cold, distant place filled with shadows and flickering lights. Shops were closing. Windows were dark. People hurried past without looking at me. I tried to make myself smaller, invisible. I pulled my coat tighter around my body and kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. There's a certain kind of fear that comes when you realize you don't belong anywhere anymore, when you understand that no one is obligated to help you. And worse, that most people won't. The Iron District was the only place I could think of. It wasn't safe. Everyone knew that. Old factories, abandoned buildings, cheap rooms rented by the night if you had money. And if you didn't, you still ended up there, one way or another. It was the kind of place people avoided, which meant it was exactly where someone like me would disappear. The walk felt endless. My legs ached. My shoes were soaked through. The cold had settled deep into my bones, turning every breath into a sharp, painful reminder that I was still here, still moving, even when I didn't want to be. At some point, I passed a small bar, Ali's Pub. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, casting red and blue shadows onto the wet pavement. Laughter and loud voices spilled out from inside, mixed with the smell of alcohol and something bitter I couldn't quite place. I kept walking. I didn't belong in places like that either. But just as I moved past the entrance, the door swung open behind me. "Hey, look at this!" The voice was slurred. I froze. 3 men stumbled out onto the sidewalk, the scent of cheap whiskey following them like a cloud. Their laughter died down as their eyes landed on me alone, soaked, dragging a broken suitcase through the night. I felt it immediately. That shift in the air. The way their expressions changed. "Where you headed, sweetheart?" One of them called out, stepping into my path. I didn't answer. I tried to move around him, keeping my gaze down, but another one stepped in from the side, blocking me again. "Ah, don't be like that," the second man said, grinning. "We're just trying to help." Help. The word felt wrong coming from him. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, my fingers slipping slightly from the rain. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Please, just let me pass." They didn't move. Instead, the third man circled behind me. My chest tightened. There was nowhere to go. "You don't look fine," the first man said, his voice lower now, more focused. "You look like you could use some company." His eyes moved over me in a way that made my skin crawl. I took a step back. "Please," I said again, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "I don't want any trouble." "Neither do we," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just, let's talk." His hand reached for my suitcase. Instinctively, I pulled it back. "No." The word came out sharper than I expected. For a split second, everything went still. Then his expression changed. "Oh," he said slowly. "You've got some attitude." The other two laughed. Before I could react, one of them grabbed the side of the suitcase, yanking it toward him. The broken latch snapped open again, and my clothes spilled out onto the wet ground for the second time that night. "Hey!" I dropped to my knees instinctively, trying to gather them. But one of the men kicked a shirt aside, laughing. "What's in here, huh?" he said. "Anything valuable?" "Please stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "That's all I have." The words slipped out before I could stop them. And the moment they did, I saw it. That spark in their eyes. They knew. I had nothing. No one. No way out. "Then you won't mind sharing," one of them said, stepping closer. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I looked around desperately, searching for anyone at all, but the street was empty. The bar door had already closed behind them. The neon sign flickered again, casting strange, distorted shadows across the pavement. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a goodbye. Not with dignity. Just disappearing into the dark, unnoticed. I opened my mouth to scream. And then, light, blinding, white headlights cut through the darkness, flooding the street with sudden brightness. The men froze. A low, powerful engine rumbled as a line of sleek black cars pulled up beside us, tires hissing against the wet road. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like the air itself had been replaced with something heavier, sharper. The men stepped back, confused, uneasy. The first car door opened. 2 men stepped out. They were different. Clean suits, straight posture, calm, controlled movements. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't have to. One of them simply looked at the 3 men. And that was enough. "Leave," he said quietly. Just one word. But there was something in his voice, something final. The men hesitated for half a second, then backed away, muttering under their breath before disappearing into the shadows they had come from. Just like that, gone. I stayed where I was, still kneeling on the wet pavement, my hands clutching the damp fabric of my clothes. My entire body was shaking now, not just from the cold, but from the sudden, overwhelming shift in everything around me. The street felt different, silent, controlled. I didn't understand what was happening, or who these people were. Then the middle car door opened. Slowly, deliberately, a man stepped out. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He simply stood there for a moment, adjusting his coat as the rain fell around him like it didn't matter. There was something about him, something that made the world feel smaller. He walked toward me, his steps measured, his presence impossible to ignore. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, unsteady. I ended up just clutching my suitcase handle tighter as I looked up at him. He didn't look at my face first. He looked at my chest, his gaze fixed on the silver orchid pendant resting against my skin. And then, he stopped. Completely. The expression on his face changed in a way I couldn't understand. Not pity. Not curiosity. Something deeper. Something recognizing. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the subtle tension in his jaw. The way his eyes searched my face like he was trying to confirm something impossible. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know why, but I suddenly felt like this moment mattered more than anything else that had happened that night. More than the rain. More than the fear. More than being thrown out. He spoke, and his voice was calm, but carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. "What is your mother's name?" The question hit me harder than anything else. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you need help?" That, for a second, I couldn't answer. My mind was still spinning, trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. But something in his eyes, something told me this wasn't a random question. I swallowed, my voice barely steady. "Deanna," I said softly. "Her name is Deanna." And the moment I said it, everything changed. The moment I said her name, the world seemed to fall silent. Deanna. It was just a name. A simple answer. The only truth I had left to hold on to after everything else had been taken from me. But the way the man in front of me reacted, it was as if I had just unlocked something buried deep inside him. His expression changed instantly. The cold, controlled composure that had defined him just seconds ago cracked just for a moment. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw something I never expected to see in a man like him. Emotion. Real, raw, unguarded emotion. He took a slow step closer, his gaze never leaving my face, as if he was searching for something proof, confirmation, something only he could see. "Deanna," he repeated under his breath, almost like a memory he had been afraid to revisit. Then his eyes dropped again, this time to the silver orchid pendant resting against my chest. His hand lifted slightly, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently reaching toward it. His fingers hovered just above the metal, not quite touching, as if he was afraid it might disappear. "That pendant," he murmured. "Where did you get it?" "My mother gave it to me," I replied, my voice still shaking from everything that had happened. "She said it was important, that I should never take it off." His hand trembled, just slightly, but I noticed. And that's when something inside me shifted. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. He let out a slow breath that sounded almost like it had been trapped inside him for years. "She always said that," he whispered. "She never changed." I frowned, confusion tightening in my chest. "You knew her?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and whatever he saw seemed to settle something in his mind. "Yes," he said quietly. "I knew her." There was a pause. The rain continued to fall around us, but it felt distant now, like the rest of the world had faded into the background. "She saved you," he added. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint lines of exhaustion etched into his face lines that didn't match the power he carried. "My name is Vincent," he said finally, "and I've been looking for you, for 20 years. The words didn't make sense. Not at first. They just hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. "I think you're mistaken," I said slowly, my mind scrambling to catch up. "I've lived here my whole life. I've never—" "You were taken from me," he interrupted gently. Not harsh, not forceful, just certain. I froze. Taken? The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to organize memories that refused to stay still. 20 years ago, he began, his voice lower now, more controlled. There was an attack, a violent one. My home was targeted. My family. He stopped. For a brief moment, his composure faltered again. There was fire, he continued. Chaos. People everywhere. My security was compromised. I lost control of everything in a matter of minutes. I couldn't look away. Something about the way he spoke. It didn't feel like a story. It felt like a wound. I had a daughter, he said. Just a baby. And in that moment, when everything was falling apart, there was only one person I trusted to get her out alive. My breath caught in my throat. Deanna, I whispered. He nodded. She wasn't just a nurse, he said. She was brave, stronger than anyone gave her credit for. When everything went wrong, she didn't hesitate. His eyes softened, filled with something close to grief. She took you, he said quietly, wrapped you up, hid you, and disappeared before anyone could stop her. I searched for years, every lead, every rumor, but it was like you both vanished into thin air. The rain seemed to grow heavier around us. Or maybe it was just me. Because suddenly, everything felt too much. I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. Are you saying, I'm your daughter? The words felt unreal as they left my mouth. Vincent didn't hesitate. Yes. Just one word. But it hit harder than anything else that night. I shook my head instinctively, taking a small step back. No, that's not possible, I said quickly. My mother Deanna, she raised me. She never said anything about this. Not once. Of course she didn't, he replied softly. She was protecting you. From what? His silence answered before he did. From the people who wanted my family erased, he said finally. If they had found you, you wouldn't have survived. The world tilted slightly. Everything I thought, I knew every memory. Every moment suddenly felt unstable, like it could collapse at any second. She gave up everything to keep you safe, he continued. She changed her name. She lived quietly. She made sure no one could ever trace you back to me. Tears blurred my vision. That doesn't make sense, I whispered. Why didn't you find us? Why now? His jaw tightened. Because she was careful, he said. And because I was busy surviving a war that never really ended. There was no pride in his voice. No arrogance. Just truth. I looked down at the pendant again. The silver orchid. I had worn it every day of my life, never questioning its origin. It was just something my mother had given me, a small piece of comfort I never thought twice about. But now, it felt heavier. More significant. Before everything happened, Vincent said, his voice softer now. I had that made, just for you. It was supposed to be a symbol, a promise that I would always protect you. My fingers curled around the pendant instinctively. A promise. One that had been broken. Or maybe, one that had never had the chance to be fulfilled. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice barely audible. You don't have to say anything, he replied gently. Not right now. For the first time since he appeared, his tone shifted less commanding, more human. I know this is a lot, he continued. More than anyone should have to process in a single night. But one thing is certain. He looked at me again. And this time, there was no hesitation in his gaze. You are not alone anymore. Those words hit me in a way I didn't expect. Because just hours ago, I had believed the exact opposite. I had believed I had no one left. No home, no family, no future. And now, a stranger was standing in front of me, telling me that everything I thought I had lost might not be gone after all. It didn't feel real. It felt like something fragile, like if I reached out too quickly, it would disappear. Vincent straightened slightly, his expression returning to that controlled calm, but something had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was focused. Come with me, he said. It's not safe for you out here. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because everything was happening too fast. Just hours ago, I had been in my home. Now I was standing in the rain, talking to a man who claimed to be my father, someone powerful enough to make 3 grown men disappear without a fight. It should have scared me, and maybe it did. But there was something else, too. A strange, quiet feeling, like a door had just opened in front of me. I looked back down the empty street. There was nothing waiting for me there. No one. Just cold pavement and a life that had already been taken away. Then I looked back at him. At Vincent. At the man who knew my mother's name. Who spoke about her with respect, with emotion, with truth. And for the first time that night, I made a choice. I nodded. Just once. And as I stepped toward the open car door, leaving the rain behind me, I had no idea that I wasn't just stepping into a car. I was stepping into a completely different life. The next morning didn't feel like a continuation of my life. It felt like I had woken up inside someone else's. Soft light spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a room so large and quiet it almost felt unreal. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember where I was, how I had gotten here, and whether the night before had actually happened. Then it all came back. The rain, the street, the question, my mother's name, and Vincent. I sat up slowly, the silk sheets slipping against my skin too smooth, too unfamiliar. Everything about this place felt distant from the world I had known just hours ago. The warmth in the room, the silence, the absence of fear, it was almost overwhelming. For so long, survival had meant enduring discomfort. Now, suddenly, there was none. And somehow, that made it harder to breathe. I stepped into the bathroom, turning on the faucet just to hear something real. Cold water ran over my hands, grounding me slightly. When I looked up at my reflection, I barely recognized the person staring back. My hair was still damp, my eyes swollen from crying, but there was something else there now. Not just pain, something sharper, something quieter. By the time I made my way down the long hallway, the scent of fresh coffee had already filled the air. It led me into a wide, sunlit dining area where Vincent was seated at the head of a polished wooden table. He looked different in the daylight, less like a shadow from the night, and more like a man who carried weight no one else could see. "You're awake," he said, setting his cup down as I entered. I nodded, unsure of what to say. On the table in front of him was a carefully arranged breakfast, more food than I had seen in weeks. But what caught my attention wasn't the food. It was the photographs. Old, slightly faded. I stepped closer, my breath catching as I recognized what I was looking at. A baby, wrapped in a blanket, wearing a small silver pendant, the same one hanging around my neck. "That's you," Vincent said quietly. I reached out slowly, picking up the photograph with trembling fingers. It didn't feel real. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was proof. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, still holding the photo like it might disappear if I let go. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he began. He told me everything. About the attack, about the fire, about the chaos that had taken everything from him in a single night. His voice remained steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it, the years of searching, the frustration, the grief that had never truly settled. "They wanted to erase my family," he said. "Not just destroy us, but remove any trace that we ever existed." I listened in silence, trying to piece together a past I had never known. "Your mother, Deanna," he continued, his voice softening. "She was the only one who didn't hesitate. When everything went wrong, she made a choice. She chose you." Tears blurred my vision again. "She ran," he said. "Not for herself, but for you. She gave up everything, her identity, her life, so you could have one." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the table. All those years. All those quiet sacrifices I never fully understood. Now they made sense. "She never told me," I whispered. "Not once." "She couldn't," Vincent replied. "The less you knew, the safer you were." A heavy silence settled between us. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The truth, the weight of it, the love behind it. Then Vincent reached into his coat and placed something on the table in front of me. A check. I looked down, and my breath stopped. $5 million. Beside it, a brochure images of a private villa, pristine and untouched. "You won't have to worry about anything anymore," he said calmly. "This is just the beginning. Everything that should have been yours, I'll make it right." For a moment, the world narrowed to that piece of paper. $5 million. A new life, security, comfort, everything I had lost, replaced instantly. But instead of relief, I felt something else. I thought about the house, the old wooden floors, the creaking stairs, the rose garden my mother tended every morning, the kitchen where she used to hum softly while cooking, the place where I had grown up, where I had belonged. And then I thought about Kelsey, standing in the doorway, calling me a stray. Slowly, I pushed the check back across the table. "I don't want this," I said. Vincent's brows furrowed slightly. "You don't?" I shook my head, my voice steadier now than it had been all morning. "She's selling the house," I said, "to pay off her debts. She's going to destroy the only thing my mother left behind." I looked up at him. "I want the house back." For a brief moment, he said nothing. Then, something changed in his expression. Not surprise, not disappointment. Something closer to respect. "You're not asking for money," he said slowly. "You're asking for justice." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully, as if seeing me for the first time, not as someone to protect, but as someone capable of standing on her own. "Good," he said finally. The word was simple, but it carried weight. "We'll do it your way." The next hour passed in a way I never expected. Not as a daughter being comforted, but as a partner in something far more calculated. Vincent didn't suggest violence. He didn't suggest force. Instead, he laid out options. Legal pressure, financial manipulation, psychological leverage. "We don't need to break the law," he said. "We just need to understand how people like your sister think and use it." And I did understand. Kelsey wasn't strong. She was desperate, greedy, afraid. 3 days later, I sat in the back of a black SUV parked across the street from my old home. The for sale sign stood in the middle of the rose garden like a scar. I stared at it, my chest tightening. Vincent sat beside me, calm as ever, reviewing information on a tablet. "She's listed it below market value," he said. "She needs quick cash." Of course she did. That was her weakness. One by one, people began arriving. Potential buyers, curious investors, and among them, Vincent's people, dressed in sharp suits, blending in perfectly. I watched through the window as they moved through the house, talking, observing, planting doubt. It started small. A comment about structural damage, a question about legal disputes, a concern about the foundation. Nothing obvious, nothing illegal, but enough. Within minutes, I saw it. The shift. Buyers hesitating, whispers spreading, doubt growing. People began to leave, one after another, until the house was empty. Kelsey burst out the front door, her face flushed, her movements frantic. She looked around, confused, angry, desperate, and, for the first time, I saw it. The fear. I leaned back slightly in my seat, watching her from a distance. Not with hatred, not with anger, but with something colder, something quieter. She had taken everything from me in one night. Now, I was taking it back, piece by piece. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. By the time the open house collapsed, I knew something had shifted permanently between me and Kelsey. Not just distance, not just anger, but awareness. She knew I was behind it, and I knew she wouldn't stop. 3 days passed, in a strange kind of silence. No calls, no messages, no direct confrontation, but I could feel it building, like pressure beneath the surface. Vincent didn't say much about it, but I noticed the way his people moved more carefully, how the security around me subtly increased. Doors were checked twice. Cars never traveled alone. Every detail was controlled without being obvious. He didn't need to say it. We both knew. Kelsey was desperate now. And desperate people don't think clearly. They react. The call came late in the afternoon. Her name lit up on my phone, and for a moment, I just stared at it. Kelsey. Just a few days ago, I would have expected anger, insults, threats. But when I answered, her voice was different, soft, careful, almost kind. "I found something," she said. I didn't respond immediately. "What kind of something?" I asked cautiously. "It's Mom's," she continued. "A diary. I was clearing out the attic, and I thought you might want it." My chest tightened. A diary? My mother had written almost every night. I used to see her sitting by the bed, pen in hand, lost in her thoughts. She never let me read it, but she always smiled when I asked. "I didn't want to throw it away," Kelsey added. "I figured you should have it." There was a pause. "I know things ended badly," she said, her tone lowering slightly. "But maybe we can at least end this properly." If I hadn't known her, I might have believed her. I glanced at Vincent, who was sitting across the room. He had already heard everything. The moment I put the call on speaker, his expression hardened not with anger, but with certainty. When the call ended, he didn't hesitate. "It's a trap," he said. "I know. There's no diary," he continued. "And even if there was, she wouldn't give it to you willingly. I know that too." The room fell silent for a moment. "Then you're not going," he said firmly. I looked at him. "I have to." His jaw tightened. "No," he replied. "You don't. I can handle this. Cleanly." I knew what he meant. And I shook my head. "If we do it your way," I said quietly, "it ends quickly. But it leaves questions. Loose ends. Problems." He didn't argue. But he didn't agree either. "This is different," I continued. "She's already unstable. If we push too hard, she'll make mistakes. But we need those mistakes on record." Vincent watched me carefully, measuring every word. "She's trying to lure me," I said, "which means she needs something from me." "And that makes it dangerous," he replied. "It also makes it predictable." Another silence. Then, slowly, he leaned back. "You want her to expose herself." "Yes. And you're willing to put yourself in the middle of it." "I already am." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. "If we do this, we do it properly." Preparation began immediately. Not rushed, not chaotic, precise. A technician fitted a small recording device inside the collar of my jacket, nearly invisible, but powerful enough to capture every word clearly. Another team set up a remote system to receive the audio in real time. Backup units were assigned positions around the meeting location. Every angle covered. Every risk calculated. "You don't engage unless necessary," Vincent said. "You keep her talking. You let her make the mistake." I nodded. "And if something goes wrong?" "It won't," I interrupted softly. But we both knew. It could. The warehouse stood at the edge of the industrial district, isolated and silent under the fading light of evening. Rusted metal walls, broken windows, overgrown weeds. It looked exactly like the kind of place where no one would hear you if something went wrong. The car stopped a short distance away. "This is as far as we go," Vincent said. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in. "You'll be watching?" I asked. "Always." The walk felt longer than it was. Every step echoed faintly against the empty ground. The wind carried a low, hollow sound through the broken structures around me, like the entire place was breathing. I reached the door. It was already slightly open. Of course it was. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. A single hanging light cast a dim yellow glow in the center of the space. And beneath it, Kelsey. She stood there, exactly as I expected. Confident. Composed. Smiling. Beside her stood Gareth, holding a briefcase, and two large men whose presence alone told me they weren't there for conversation. "You came," Kelsey said, her voice echoing softly. "I said I would," I replied. My voice was steady, calm, even though my heart was pounding. She held up a small black book. "Here it is," she said. "Mom's diary." For a second, just a second, I wanted to believe it, but I knew better. "Give it to me," I said. She smiled wider. "Then let it fall." The book hit the ground with a dull sound. It opened slightly. Blank pages. "You really haven't changed," she said, her tone shifting instantly. "Still so easy to fool." I didn't react. I couldn't. Not yet. I just need one thing from you, she continued, nodding toward Gareth. He stepped forward, opening his briefcase and pulling out a document. A signature, she said. That's all. Then you can walk away. I looked at the paper, then back at her. I thought I wasn't part of the family, I said quietly. You're not, she replied. But legally, you're still a problem. Good. She was talking. You said the will gave you everything, I continued. So why do you need me? She rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. Because things aren't as simple as they look, she snapped. There are complications, technicalities, like fraud? I asked softly. That did it. Her expression hardened. You should be grateful, she said sharply. I'm giving you a chance to leave with something. I already left with nothing, I replied. The tension shifted. The two men stepped slightly closer. Gareth watched silently. And Kelsey, she lost patience. Enough, she said. Her hand moved. And suddenly, there was a knife. The blade caught the dim light, flashing just enough to make my breath hitch. You're going to sign, she said, her voice shaking now, not from weakness, but from desperation. This was it. The moment, I took a slow breath and looked directly at her. You've said enough, I said quietly. For a second, she didn't understand. Then, her eyes widened. What? Everything you've said, I continued, my voice calm, controlled, has been recorded. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Her face changed instantly. Shock. Fear. Rage. All at once. You, she started, her voice breaking as she lunged forward. The knife came toward me. Fast. Desperate. I stepped back and pressed the button. The doors exploded open. Blinding light flooded the warehouse. Heavy footsteps thundered across the concrete floor. And in an instant, everything was over. Vincent's men moved like a single force, surrounding the space before anyone could react. The two men dropped their weapons almost immediately, raising their hands. Gareth froze. And Kelsey stood there, shaking, the knife slipping from her fingers as reality finally caught up with her. Vincent walked in slowly, calm, unhurried. And when she saw him, she understood everything. And for the first time since this began, she was afraid of me. For a moment, no one moved. The warehouse, which had felt so vast and threatening just seconds ago, suddenly seemed small, contained, like the walls themselves were closing in on everything Kelsey had tried to build. The knife slipped from her hand and hit the concrete with a sharp metallic sound that echoed through the silence. That sound, it felt like the end. Not just of the confrontation, but of everything she had done. Vincent didn't rush. He never did. He stepped forward slowly, his presence filling the space without a single word. The men around him didn't need instructions, they had already secured every exit, every angle. The two thugs Kelsey had hired were on their knees now, hands raised, their earlier confidence completely gone. Gareth stood frozen near the edge of the light, his briefcase hanging loosely at his side like he had forgotten it was even there. And Kelsey, she looked different. Not strong, not in control, just small. Her eyes darted between me and Vincent, trying to make sense of something she could no longer manipulate. You, she whispered, her voice trembling. You planned this. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her. Really looked at her. This was the same person who had thrown me out into the rain, who had called me a stray, who had watched me walk away with nothing. And yet now, standing in front of me, she didn't look powerful. She looked afraid. You wanted me gone, I said quietly. You just didn't expect me to come back. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because deep down, she knew it was true. The distant sound of sirens began to cut through the night. Faint at first, then louder. Closer. Kelsey's head snapped toward the sound, panic flooding her expression. No, she breathed. No, 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 this isn't what you think. But it was exactly what it looked like. Vincent stepped beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, not controlling, not guiding. Just there, solid, steady. You made your choices, he said, his voice calm but final. Now, you face the consequences. The warehouse doors opened again. This time not with force, but with authority. Police officers flooded in, their movements precise, controlled. There was no chaos, no confusion. Everything had already been laid out, every piece of evidence secured before they even arrived. Kelsey backed away, shaking her head, her hands trembling. "This is a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice breaking. "She's lying, she set me up." No one responded, because no one needed to. Gareth tried to slip toward the shadows, but two officers intercepted him before he could take more than a step. His briefcase was taken, opened, its contents examined on the spot. Forged documents, false transfers, everything. As for Kelsey, they approached her slowly, giving her time to understand what was happening, time to realize there was no way out. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound was quieter than the knife hitting the ground, but somehow heavier, more final. She turned to me then. Desperation filled her eyes, raw, unfiltered. "Mallory, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Tell them this isn't real. Tell them it was just a mistake. We can fix this. We're sisters." The word hit me harder than I expected. Sisters. For a brief moment, memories flashed through my mind, shared laughter, whispered conversations, nights when we stayed up too late talking about things that didn't matter. A different version of her. A different version of us. But that version was gone. "You made your choice," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. Not this time. Her expression broke completely. Tears spilled down her face as the officers led her away, her protests turning into sobs that echoed faintly through the warehouse before disappearing into the night. And just like that, it was over. The silence that followed felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, just quiet. Vincent looked down at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You did well," he said. Simple words, but they carried something deeper than approval. Respect. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave my body all at once. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just release. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Evidence had been clear, recorded, undeniable. There were no loopholes left to hide behind. No stories left to twist. In the end, the outcome was exactly what it needed to be. Kelsey was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, charges of fraud, extortion, and attempted coercion stacking into something she couldn't escape. Gareth lost everything: his license, his reputation, his future. Even Officer Miller, the man who had dragged me out of my home without hesitation, faced investigation once his involvement came to light. For once, the system worked. A month later, winter settled quietly over the city. Snow covered the streets, softening the sharp edges of everything that had happened. I stood in front of the house again. My house. The rose garden had been restored. The broken soil replaced, the damaged stems carefully pruned back. Small white buds had begun to appear again, fragile but alive. Just like everything else. I held the key in my hand for a long moment before unlocking the door. The sound was familiar, comforting, and when I stepped inside, it felt different. Not empty, not cold, but changed. The silence inside wasn't painful anymore. It was peaceful, but I knew I couldn't live here the way things used to be. Too many memories, too many ghosts. So I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something my mother had taught me long before I understood it. I turned the house into something new, a place for children who had nowhere else to go, a place where no one would ever be told they didn't belong. Vincent didn't question it. He didn't try to change my mind. Instead, he supported it quietly, completely. I watched him change too. Not all at once, but slowly, subtly. A man who had spent his life surviving, learning how to build something instead. The day we visited my mother's grave, the snow fell gently around us, covering the ground in soft white silence. I placed a bouquet of white orchids at the base of the stone, my fingers lingering there for just a moment. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything. For the life she gave me. For the strength she left behind." When I stood up, Vincent was a few steps behind me, his head lowered in quiet respect. Neither of us needed to say anything. Some things didn't need words. As we walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pain, not loss, but something lighter, something steady. I had lost a sister, but I had gained the truth. I had lost a home, but I had found a purpose. And for the first time since that night in the rain, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because this time, I was the one choosing my future. When I look back at everything that happened, I realize this story was never just about revenge. It was about identity, about loss, and about the quiet strength it takes to stand back up when the world has already decided you don't belong. I was thrown out with nothing, no home, no family, no future. And yet, that very moment of breaking became the beginning of something I never expected. Not just justice, but truth. Not just survival, but purpose. What makes this journey powerful isn't that I won. It's how I chose to win. I didn't become cruel just because I was treated cruelly. I didn't destroy others just because I was destroyed. Instead, I chose to face everything with clarity, patience, and dignity, and in the end, that made all the difference. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, even for a moment, then I hope you'll stay a little longer. Subscribe to Revenge Truth Vault for more stories like this. Stories about pain, resilience, justice, and the hidden strength we all carry inside. And tell me, if you were in my place, would you have chosen the same path?